Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. As you can see, the beard got to me, so we're all trimmed back. Still haven't been to the hairdresser. It's a mess. Don't look, but that's all right. In today's episode, what we're going to look at is if I like this type of wine, what else will I like? Because there are so many new varieties out there. Now, this was actually a question put to me by MMC. Thanks a lot, MMC. This turned out to be a lot more complex than I thought, but it's been fascinating to do the discovery. So I hope everybody else enjoys what I've found out. Look, first of all, you've got to think about why you've tried the wines that you have in Australia. And the answer is that the top 5 grapes, in roughly this order, are Shiraz, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Sauvignon Blanc. And if we can look at the data that comes out of this year's crush, we can look at the data that comes out of the International Institute for Viticulture, and you can see that those 5 varieties crop up over and over again. So the reason that you tend to keep seeing these wines is this is most of what we grow. Now, if we look at what else we might want to try, we actually have to come to terms with a very uncomfortable fact, which is these grapes taste different when they're made in different places. And this is because, unfortunately, grape varieties need different amounts of sunlight and warmth and all sorts of things to reach ripeness. And ripeness is, in fact, a really, really difficult thing to talk about. There's this thing called terroir, and we can talk a lot about what it might mean, but what it really refers to are all the environmental factors that affect the vine's biology, and therefore they are going to affect the grape because they are connected systems. One of the issues that we have is that grapes themselves go through quite a long ripening cycle. Initially, they just sit there on the vine and they grow up and they're these hard little green things that aren't actually all that nice. And then they reach a stage we call veraison, which is when they actually start to develop their sugar. Up until now, what they've been doing is building up acid and things like that. And these are the natural grape acids, tartaric acid, malic acid, and they've just been building up inside the grape. As the grape goes through veraison, it starts to properly ripen. And what that means is that we get more sugar. But as the sugar goes up, the acidity goes down. And as we keep getting this grape riper and riper, things like colour start to develop. We start to see the anthocyanins that are going to give us a lovely purple skin colour for a black grape. And right towards the end of ripeness, as the sugar is going up and the acid is dropping down and the anthocyanins are coming up, we start to get the actual flavour and aroma compounds. And what this means is that we have to wait a long time for the grape to become actually ripe. So look at this graph, and what you'll see is we've got this notion of technological maturity, where we have enough sugar to turn into alcohol, and we haven't lost so much acid that the resulting wine will taste unpleasant or be the wrong colour or things like that. But this is no guarantee that the anthocyanins and the flavours are going to be equally ripe. In fact, what we depend upon is the tannin in the skins to build up to a certain level and the tannins in the seeds to drop away so that they're not too bitter. It's incredibly complex, and what it can be affected by is the warmth, the amount of moisture, the amount of sunlight striking the canopy, the way that you've built the canopy, the wind, all sorts of things can affect this. But the biggest implication for us in terms of winemaking is what happens to flavour when you've got a cooler climate wine versus a warmer climate wine. Now, this is a fantastic table, and all the references are available for this, because if I'm using anything from anybody else, I like to give them credit, obviously. And this tells you what happens to fruit styles when it's cooler. So a cool climate fruit style is leaner and tartar. A warm to hot climate is overripe and lush. That sounds familiar. When it comes to white flavours, cooler climate is apple and pear. Warm to hot is mango pineapple. For red flavours, you've got cranberries in the cooler climate, that more acidic red fruit. Going to plum in an intermediate climate, going to prune in a hot climate. And you're starting to see how this works. Because ultimately, if we let the grape go through too far, if it gets too much sugar, while we start converting this into alcohol, the yeast will in fact die above about 15.5% to 16% alcohol, unless we do some very clever things. Yeast ferment up to a certain point, and then alcohol becomes toxic to them, destroys their membranes, they die. So we've got to keep an eye on how much sugar we've got. We've got to keep an eye on how much acid we've got left, And we've got to keep an eye on all of these different types of ripeness. So when somebody says, I like Shiraz, that doesn't necessarily tell me very much at all. If somebody likes Barossa Shiraz, then they like Shiraz that comes from a warm to hot climate. If somebody likes Coonawarra Shiraz, they like a type of Shiraz that comes from a comparatively cooler climate. Now, this is all really big comparison stuff because compared to the rest of the world, Australia has so much sunlight and warmth. It's crazy. Other places, I mean, there are places, Spain itself has tons. That's why a lot of Spanish varieties thrive here. Southern Italy has tons. That's why a lot of Southern Italian varieties thrive here. But compared to most of France, we have a generous amount of sunlight that is almost unbelievable. As these grapes get riper, the wines tend to become bigger. And one of the distinguishing characteristics for a long time of Australian Shiraz was it was a big wine. You know, it's this giant, fruity, jammy number loaded up with new oak because with those incredibly strong and dense flavours, you could put in a lot of oak character and they'd sit well together. And that's been a popular style for ages, so we've got a lot more elegant. Some people still like it, and if you like it, that's absolutely fine, because to be honest, there's nothing like a big old-fashioned glass of Shiraz, but it does tend to overwhelm whatever else you're trying to put with it. One of the other things that comes out is if we actually look at the grapevine maturity groupings, which is another table from the same paper, you can see that the ranges over which grapes ripen vary as well, and they vary by climate. Pinot Gris, for example, would normally prefer a much cooler climate overall than Grenache. If we go warmer, if we keep pushing the ripeness, one of the things that happens is we tend to lose those characteristics that really define a grape variety. We lose its typicity. So what I've done is I have read through an awful lot of references, and I'm going to make them all available at the end of this talk. And I have put together, based on my own experience and based on a lot of reading, a guide to other wines you might like to try based on whether you prefer cooler climate wines or warmer climate wines. And I've based them in the red wines around Shiraz and Cabernet, because they're the two most common reds, and for white wines around Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, because they're the two most common whites. So let's have a look at my amazing red wine chart. So first of all, the Riverina is one of the warmest areas. It's inland, it doesn't have sea breezes to cool it down, and ultimately it's a pretty harsh region to grow wine. And it grows some of the hottest climate wine in Australia. So if you really like a big Shiraz from a very hot place, then my suggestion is that if you're looking for existing grapes you might like, why not try a McLaren Vale Grenache? McLaren Vale Grenache is a big, beautifully round, delightfully complex, fruity wine. Grenache is a wine that McLaren Vale does brilliantly. So why not check out one of those? But if you want to try one of the new arrivals, one of the new grape varieties people are growing, well, let's have a look at grape varieties that are coming in from southern Italy. And so we're looking at Nero d'Avola. We're looking at Durif, Tempranillo, Sangiovese, Montepulciano, Aglianico. All of these, if you like the warmer style of Shiraz, you will probably enjoy one of these types of wine. And there's another one that comes from Portugal called Touriga Nacional. And that's one you don't see often by itself because it's quite often used in Portuguese blending. But Touriga is a lovely grape. It loves South Australia. And so if you really like those warmer styles of Shiraz, then why not give one of those a go? Now let's look at Cabernet. If you really like a Barossa or a McLaren Vale Cabernet, well, first of all, why don't you just try Shiraz? You've probably already done that. That's fine. Maybe try Grenache as well. Or look at some of the Cabernet that's coming out of Margaret River if you happen to like Clare Valley Cabernet. So if you really like Coonawarra Cabernet, I'm going to suggest that you actually look at Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is a fantastic Italian grape. It makes some of the most beautiful Italian wines. It's the grape behind Barolo and Barbaresco, and it comes from the Piedmont, up in the north. Although it's a wine that is, it loves a hot climate and it really needs a lot of sunshine to turn over, it doesn't produce the kind of jammy big wine that you would associate with that. In fact, if you picked up a glass of Nebbiolo and looked at it, its colour will look quite weak. compared to a very large number of Australian wines. Don't be deceived. It is incredibly powerful in the mouth. But the reason I've put it here with the cooler climate Shirazes and the cooler climate Cabernets is because there is a level of spiciness and involvement that I think you would probably find rewarding. I haven't done a straight match, warm to warm, cold to cold. What I've tried to do is come up with things that would be a nice next step for you. So let's go and look at whites. Now, in terms of whites, if you've been drinking and enjoying Chardonnay, then obviously you should give Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio, same grape, different winemaking style, a go. You probably already have. Pinot Gris is now so popular, it's actually surpassed Riesling. And most of Australia's Riesling winemakers are going, why do we bother with Riesling? Please bother with Riesling. It is an absolutely gorgeous wine. And the way that we make it here in Australia, particularly in the Clare Valley, is a testament to how a grape can reflect its locality beautifully and yet still have fantastic characters of its parent grape. So my suggestion is, if you like a warmer Chardonnay, a big Chardonnay, sort of one of those sort of big melony, fruity ones, then maybe you should be looking at Viognier, which has a lot of lovely apricot fruit, or Marsanne, which is a French variety that's been grown here for ages. If you like things a little bit cooler in your Chardonnays, why not try Semillon? Semillon from the Clare Valley is a beautiful variety. It's hard to find, it's hard to sell. Please give it a try. It does come up really well, and it's a nice alternative to Chardonnay. But if you like your Chardonnays cooler and less wooded and lighter, maybe you should be looking at Riesling or an austere Pinot Gris, something from Tassie or maybe even from New Zealand. Now, if you're looking for a new arrival, Fiano and Vermentino. Absolutely, down the line, you need to try Fiano and Vermentino. You should also have a look at Assertico and Friuliano, I think is how it's pronounced. All of these varieties are fantastic additions to white wine drinking in Australia. And if you enjoy Australian white wine, you should try all of these new varieties. I suspect that you will find that you really like Vermentino and Fiano. And if you're a Sauvignon Blanc drinker, then what I'd say is maybe look at Vermentino and then look at what we're doing with Grüner Veltliner, which is an Austrian variety that's now grown here and is making some absolutely lovely wines that have the same kind of backbone as a Sauvignon Blanc, but they go off in a different direction. They don't have that same kind of vegetal note, but they're really enjoyable wines. But if you're a Sauvignon Blanc drinker who likes a warm Sauvignon Blanc, then maybe you want to try a Semillon from the Hunter, or a Clare Valley Riesling. Or if you like them cooler and more acidic, maybe you should be looking at a Margaret River Chardonnay, or maybe even a Langhorne Creek Chardonnay, possibly even a Tasmanian Riesling. My guide here is to get people thinking about the next thing that they could be drinking, and it's certainly not a one-to-one matching of these two are identical, but I hope that you'll actually enjoy it. A couple of these grapes are both heat-loving and drought-tolerant. Nero d'Avola and Fiano are both actually quite water-efficient. And as these areas get hotter and water becomes more scarce and more expensive, this is going to be an important factor for winemaking. And that actually drives what I'm tasting today. I am tasting a Chalmers 2017 Heathcote Fiano, and this is from Victoria. And this is one of those new varieties. It's an Italian variety, so it's a very old variety, but it's come to us now. And I'm drinking it because I like Chardonnay. I quite often prefer my Chardonnays lower on wood and in a more acid-driven style. So I'm hoping that this is going to be nice. So let's have a look. So what are we going to do? We're going to look, we're going to swirl, we're going to sniff, we're going to sip, and we're going to think. So let's start by looking. And you can probably see that this has has got a lovely pale yellow to it. Absolutely clear, no residue at all. Not that's necessarily a bad thing, but we're just identifying it. And just a lovely, lovely pale yellow. You really have to try all these new varieties because sometimes they feel a bit familiar, but you've got all these new aspects as well. So I'm getting honey, a bit of honey, definitely getting some lemon. A lot of lemon on the nose. I think there's a bit of nectarine lurking around in here, and the acid is sitting beautifully in the mouth. This is fresh, and it's just waking my palate up. It's the kind of thing that you have and you go, wow, I feel a little bit hungry. This is a very enjoyable wine. So if you get a bottle of this, it's about $28 to $30. So it's not as cheap as the ones I've been looking at, but they've done a lot of manual handling on this wine, and what that generally means is those costs have to go somewhere. Fiano is not a major crop, so the actual price and the amount of work required to get this kind of thing up is going to be higher. So sometimes when you buy some of these new wines, you're paying a little bit more. But if you like Chardonnay, you'll really enjoy Fiano. Well, I think that's more than enough from me. Covered all the points I wanted to cover, and I hope I've answered your question, MMC. If I haven't, let me know, and we will sort things out. Anyway, I had a lot of fun with this one, and don't forget that there are so many different varieties you could be trying. Let me give you some homework. If it's at all fun for you, my suggestion is that you take the red and white images and you find one new thing to try from the Australian side and one new thing to try from the other side. And you go out with a price level, and you sort of, let's say you want to try Semillon from the Clare Valley. Best Clare Valley Semillon under $25, $20, whatever it happens to be. And come up and look through it and read through it and work out what you think they're saying and just see if you can find that. And the same goes for the other, best Fiano. Best Fianos in Australia, best Vermentino under $25, whatever you want to spend, and see if you can find some good wines. And that definitely is more than enough for me. Salut! Well, thank you very much for watching. Please remember that wine is best enjoyed in moderation. We're all a little stressed right now, but if you think you need help or someone to talk to, maybe put down the wine glass and get in touch with one of these great groups of people who are on the screen right now. Look after yourself, stay well, and I'll see you next time.